34 days since the president fulfilled his promise to shut down the government. And the American people are not happy about it. Poll after poll shows that people are not okay with the way that the President of the United States is handling his job, and it is getting worse by the day. Because to any reasonable person, this shutdown has been stupid and useless and cruel. There are so many failures to talk about, but I want to talk about 4 specific failures that, if it was any other president, if it were any other time in modern history, would bring a president and a Congress to its senses and end the shutdown. And the first failure is this: federal workers are in food lines. Federal workers are in food lines. People with jobs are now in food lines. Hundreds of thousands of people who work for the government are either furloughed or working without pay. And tomorrow, these American public servants will miss their second paycheck. And there's a big difference between missing the first paycheck and the second paycheck. Some people can absorb missing the first paycheck, but this second paycheck is going to be really, really challenging for tens of thousands of American public servants, because the rent is due, the mortgage is due, the car registration is due, the insurance is due, the utilities are due at the beginning of the month. This brings the amount of money that American public servants are owed by their government for work already performed to $4.7 billion. And remember that about a third of all federal workers are veterans. It may be hard for billionaires in the cabinet to understand, but for the middle class, missing 2 paychecks in a row is a total disaster. Now, I've met people working in airport security who can't concentrate. They can't sleep because they can't stop worrying about how they're going to pay their bills. I've met government workers in the midst of applying for food stamps and asking local charities for help. I met a single mom who spent her career working hard to build a life for her family, and she told me that without these paychecks, it's all going backwards. As one Washington Post columnist put it, under Republican leadership, the United States is starting to look like the failed Soviet system, with middle-class workers literally waiting in bread lines. I'm grateful that for every story I've heard of someone suffering, there's also a story of people stepping up to help. In Hawaii, in particular, local utility companies, financial institutions, and others have decided that they will not penalize federal workers hurt by the shutdown if they miss a payment. And so I want to thank our local banks for allowing unpaid federal workers to make a late payment on their mortgage without a penalty. And I want to thank our credit unions for extending very cheap credit. I want to thank people who are organizing in local communities, not just in Hawaii, but across the country, so that middle-class families can make it through this. But federal workers want paychecks, not food banks. They want paychecks. They don't want charity. They want to be compensated for the work that they do. They shouldn't rely on pop-up kitchens for furloughed workers or online fundraising campaigns or the kindness of family, friends, and strangers. As great as all of that is, they should just get paid. And that starts with opening the government. Here's the second failure that should end this shutdown right away, and that is that economic growth is already slowing. This week, a White House advisor said that the nation's economic growth could be 0 if the shutdown goes on. Economists and business leaders were already worried about the potential for a recession, and this shutdown is fanning those unfortunate flames. Small businesses can't get loans, companies can't go public. This administration has stopped some of the core functions of our market economy. But there is one thing that won't stop, and that is the corruption in this administration. If you have money, this administration takes care of you. And if you won't, they won't. If you don't, then they won't. Federal workers have been called back to the office to take care of oil and gas leases, and help financial institutions. They're working unpaid so that special interests can keep making money. And this is the third failure. While people who are fortunate financially are protected, this shutdown leaves the people most vulnerable to fend for themselves. Food pantries and health clinics that rely on federal funds are out of supplies, which means that Americans are going to start to go hungry and without medicine for everything from diabetes to addiction. Landlords who provide housing for 4 million people, mostly seniors and people with disabilities and kids, will soon stop receiving rent payments. They'll have to decide how long they can hold out before being forced to evict these people or lose the properties themselves. Housing authorities are delaying the release of Section 8 vouchers. Domestic violence shelters that rely on federal funds are furloughing their own workers and cutting back services that save lives. So men, women, and children who need to get out of a dangerous situation at home have fewer options to get to safety. And that brings me to the fourth failure, which is that public safety is gravely at risk. This is a serious matter. This isn't about whether Donald Trump can save face or whether the Republicans can vanquish the Democrats or Nancy Pelosi makes, Mitch McConnell look bad. It's none of that. Public safety is at risk. Air traffic controllers and TSA workers are working without pay. They are stressed out, and they are becoming increasingly understaffed and undersupported, and new employees, there's no ability to train them. And they are sounding the alarm. This isn't my rhetorical flourish. I want you to listen to what the National Air Traffic Control Association said yesterday. Quote, "We cannot even calculate the level of risk currently at play, nor predict the point at which the entire system will break. It is unprecedented." The National Transportation Safety Board is being forced to choose which crashes to investigate and which not to, leaving us with unanswered questions and risking lives in the future. As of this week, the NTSB has been unable to investigate 87 crashes, including some with fatalities. This is a pattern. It's a pattern of recklessly endangering the safety of Americans. We're just 2 months out from a wildfire that destroyed 18,000 homes and buildings and killed 86 people, and yet the shutdown has stopped us from training firefighters. It's canceled controlled burns. It's led to dead trees piling up in places that we know pose a fire risk. And this is what happens when you shut down the government to try to get your way. You put real people at risk. The safety of Americans abroad and at home is threatened by this shutdown. The State Department canceled a border security summit. This fight is supposed to be about border security, and yet we are not paying TSA. We are not paying FBI agents. We are about to close at least some of our federal courts if this shutdown continues, and the State Department itself just canceled a border security summit. FBI agents are working without pay. Field offices are operating in fiscal uncertainty, and that means investigations into street gangs and drug dealers are on hold. Trainings on child abductions and counterterrorism have been canceled. Communications with sources about gangs such as MS-13 have stopped. As one agent put it, quote, "Our enemies know they can run freely." Our enemies know they can run freely. So I ask all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, why would we put public safety at risk? Why can't we reopen the government and negotiate our differences? And the truth of the matter is, as it relates to border security, I'm in my 7th year in the United States Senate. And every year we do a bipartisan bill that includes border security in the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee. We always do this. And by the way, every Republican and every Democrat will quietly say, yeah, we're not doing a cement wall from sea to shining sea. That makes no sense. And nobody at the Department of Homeland Security thinks that's a good idea. And so we quietly appropriate money, some for personnel, some for beds, some for courts so they can adjudicate some of these cases, and some for physical barriers, right, where it's appropriate. You put up a wall where it makes sense. You don't put up the wall where it doesn't make sense. We do this all the time. And so the idea that we're going to shut down the government and shut down portions of the Department of Homeland Security itself in order to get to a place so that the President of the United States can save face is just absurd. We've got to be the grown-ups here, and that's going to require some Republicans to craft a border security package with Democrats like we have over the last 6 or 7 years. And we got to do that after we open the government. And the reason that that is so essential is that this president especially, certainly this president especially, but no president, Democrat, Republican, now, 30 years from now, should ever inflict pain on the American people in order to generate leverage on a policy discussion. When somebody does that, and if it's one of my friends in the Senate and they do this 10 years from now, I want someone to read this speech back to me. Because the answer to the offer, which is, I'm going to hurt Americans unless you do X, should be, you get nothing. In exchange for not hurting Americans, that is not a cookie for us. And Barack Obama learned that lesson the hard way. Only when he finally said, you guys want to screw with the American economy, you want to mess with the debt ceiling, you get nothing. And they backed off, and all that brinkmanship stopped. But every time we reward hostage-taking, we will get more hostage-taking. And so as painful as all of this is, we have to stand firm. We are absolutely willing to negotiate a package related to border security, which will no doubt include some physical barrier, because we do that every year, actually. But I'm not doing any of that until the government is open. And that's not just a political position, that is a matter of principle, because we can't live like this as a country. We cannot function like this. If we do this, if we cut a deal now and we give them $2 billion for the wall, debt ceiling is coming up in March or April. Here we go again. Fiscal year expires in September. Here we go again. And we will never govern, and I know the presiding officer was a governor. That's just no way to run a country. Let this be the last shutdown. Now, I know the two leaders of the Senate are in what appear to be constructive conversations. I know there are plenty of adults that want to get us out of this. And for the first time in several weeks, I've actually felt somewhat hopeful about the trajectory. I don't think we're going to fix this, in the next hour or so, but at least we're talking, and at least there seems to be a desire to structure an off-ramp. But we just have to do one simple thing first. We have to reopen the government. People are about to miss their paychecks for the second time tomorrow. It is our obligation to reopen the government. I yield the floor.